compromise. Revolution overturns and destroys everything that gets in its way.
This is Breakthrough News, and you are watching The Freedom Side. I am one of your hosts, Eugene Puryear, here alongside my intrepid co-host, Rania Khalek. Rania, as always, great to be back alongside you.
It's always a pleasure to be alongside you, Eugene.
Well, the pleasure is all mine, and big shout out to everyone who's joining us here on the show. Just, I'll note, if you happen to be watching on YouTube, this would be as good a time as any to go ahead and hit subscribe, then hit the bell so you can get the alerts for the things that you subscribe to, so that way you don't miss any of the fantastic content that is coming here from Breakthrough News, including Dispatches with Rania Khalek, which had a great live, by the way, with Elijah Mangier on Tuesday. I definitely hope people check that out if you haven't already, but you don't want to miss any of these things, so hit subscribe, hit the bell so that you're on top of it. If you're watching on Free Speech TV, all you got to do is just keep watching. And of course, we always salute the great team at FSTV for making it possible for us to be here on that platform as well. Other things, Rania, that the Blair Witch Project.
Yes. Yeah, well, you know, Eugene, that is the perfect opportunity to remind our audience to please help support independent media. You can help us here at Breakthrough News break through the mainstream propaganda by becoming a member of Breakthrough News. You go to patreon.com/Breakthrough News. For as little as $5 a month, you can access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch, such as this lovely Breakthrough News mug. Very cool. And most importantly, you'll be a part of helping to bring reality, bring the real news, bring the truth to people who are on the interwebs. There's so much propaganda out there. I think the last year and a half of genocide in Gaza has demonstrated that to anybody who thought maybe they could rely on the mainstream media in any way whatsoever. So definitely support us here at Breakthrough News. It helps, keep all the electricity on, despite sometimes it turning off like it just did.
I'm telling you, is there like a public comment section in the IMF deal? I'd like to submit something, my own feelings.
Eugene, I have to subscribe to 3 different electricity providers to get 24-hour electricity. It's insane. It's insane. Electricity in the third world can be more expensive than your rent.
Yeah, that's very true. It's very true. Well, anyway, those are all good reasons, as Rania said, to, if you can, become a patron. I don't know if we'll be able to fix the electricity situation in Lebanon, but we'll try. The bigger your donation, the easier we can make major changes on all fronts in the world. So just think about everything you'd like to see changed in the world, and then think about the size of the donation you make. That's just one way to look at it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But plenty of good things for you. Well, sorry. Right. I thought you were about to say something. I was just about to take a sip of this coffee.
I was like, oh my God, he's gonna take a sip while I'm done talking. What am I gonna do?
I know.
That's not synced up yet. That's what happens on live TV, folks.
We're not synced up yet, but here we are. But yeah, so please, if you can, your patronage is greatly appreciated. Shout out to all our existing patrons, of course, and everything that everyone has done to spread the word. And I think Rania made a very good point. I mean, it's sort of like drinking from a fire hose when you look things up online. People don't know where to go, where to trust. It's hard to find good, sources and things that you can rely on. And I think Breakthrough News is one of those pillars that you can indeed lean on in these tough and complex times. So helping us make it more available for us to do more is really just contributing to media literacy as well as many other good, prominent causes. But there are a range of different things that we want to get to today. As always, we are going to go all around the world. So this is also a great time for you to go ahead and let people know somehow, some way, carrier pigeon, car horn, knocking on a door, text, phone call perhaps even. I don't know if people still do that. Leave a message. Let people know that we are here. We are moving forward. The Freedom Side is going to get on the road. And we want to start here, Rania, with a story we've been covering consistently, as we should be, because it's one of the biggest stories on the planet Earth, although it's not covered that way, and that is the ongoing conflict in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo, which has been taking a lot of different turns recently. recently, and we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show once again by Kambale Musavuli, who is an analyst with the Center for Research on Congo-Kinshasa. As always, Kambale, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for keeping the story alive.
Well, doing the best we can. A lot of different threads here. I mean, we've had the announcement, I think it was today's the 13th, that the troops from SADC, the Southern African Development Community, are at least allegedly going to be withdrawing. There's also the announcement that came from the president of Angola that Felix Tshisekedi will be negotiating directly, it seems, with M23, with Angola as the mediator. A lot of things I guess we could say about all of this, Kambale, but it seems that many of these pieces that Mr. Tshisekedi has been perhaps outmaneuvered by other forces, because these are many things that he said would never happen and that he would never do. But of course, we've seen M23 backed by Rwanda make significant military gains over the past 2 weeks.
I mean, the actions of the administration of Tshisekedi clearly shows that they lack strategy, as one, and two, they lack credibility from the people. Even though we know that the SADC forces are going to leave, we know that Angola is even pushing for direct negotiation with the M23 in Rwanda. One thing that's even much more worrisome is the attempt by the Congolese government or some Congolese officials to get closer to the United States to give away control of Congo's mineral resources. So if you look at it from the perspective, clearly you see that they are out of ideas of what to actually do. But if you compare it not to what's happening in the Sahel, right? The people of the Sahel, when you think about Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, they rely on the people in the country, right? So the question will become, what is the plan of the Tshisekedi regime for the people of the Congo? What are the consultations being made with the people of the Congo about all these decisions that's being made, right? Where do they fall in all the strategies? So if you put it that way, then the conflict becomes very clear that the people of the Congo since 1885 to present have not been at the table to decide the affairs of the Congo. The elite of the country have always engaged. If you go back to even before 1885, we speak about slavery. When we had the Kingdom of the Congo, the relationship between the Kingdom of the Congo and Portugal that ended up in slavery of the people, it was the elite of the country collaborated with Western nations for that. That same framework is still happening today. I do believe that the Congolese government is going to be pushed to negotiate, but it's not going to end the fundamental problem that has caused the millions of deaths in the Congo. And the fundamental problem that we have is that Congo is endowed with so much mineral wealth, right? That is essential to the fourth industrial revolution. Without Congo's minerals, you can't even discuss, be it having a drone in the air, be it even using AI models, right? And that wealth, that mineral wealth, is right mostly in the east and the south of the Congo. And as Mao said, whoever controls the world, whoever controls the Congo controls the world. That is actually what's happening. How do we gain control of this wealth? How do we get it at a very cheap cost? Who do we use on the African continent as a conduit for the mineral? In the east, Rwanda and Uganda have been used for the pilfer of Congo's resources. And as we're looking at the Congolese government, they are willing to literally give away the future of the Congo to the United States to give the U.S. access to critical minerals as the U.S. vows to fight China's presence on the African continent.
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of China, because in some of the news reporting on this potential mineral deal that you were just referencing, especially in mainstream Western outlets, it's been framed in the context of, oh, this is a way for the U.S. to push back against China and Africa. And you even have this lobbying group that calls itself the Africa USA Business Council that actually wrote to Secretary of State Marco Rubio on behalf of a Congolese senator, just talking about a possible deal and framing it specifically as something that could be, I'm going to quote from it, a widening strategic, China's dominating a widening strategic gap where adversarial nations continue to monopolize Africa's resources. So this is obviously like some capitalistic lobbying group. I don't know if you want to talk a bit more about what that means, but the point is this is a bunch of people who want to make money selling off African resources, trying to use this Cold War with China and others like Russia to sort of lure, I guess, the Trump administration into coming into the Congo, if I guess the U.S., is probably already involved in Congo, I imagine. Anyways, I'm curious if you can talk about that sort of China-U.S. war aspect to this, and if that might play a role in what we might see happen between the U.S. and Congo moving forward.
Let's be very clear. The United States has been engaged in the conflict since 1885. They even engage right now. American companies are involved in the extraction. Companies traded at the New York Stock Exchange, even the Toronto Stock Exchange, are operating in the DRC. So it's not that this deal is something magical that's now going to bring U.S. Strategic mineral interest in the DRC. They're already operating, right? But we have to think about what is actually unfolding. The Tshisekedi regime is acting with desperation. And I believe that they've asked many people within the Congolese government to do whatever they can to come up with ideas of how to bring the attention of Western nations around this conflict, supposing that the U.S. is not involved when AFRICOM is operating in Congo, is operating in Rwanda, is operating in Uganda, the military forces of the U.S. is in the region. So Senator Pierre Kalambai hired a lobby firm in Washington that counseled the U.S. Africa Business Council and so on. And I don't know how much they pay them, of course, because of U.S. law, they have to disclose what they're doing on behalf of an official in the outside of the United States. So in the filing, we are able to see the letters that's been sent out, right? So this lobby firm on behalf of this senator, that's exactly what they're even saying on the bottom of the letter, right? That on behalf of the Congolese senator, I send a letter to Marco Rubio, I send a letter to members of Congress in the critical minerals working group, and many different U.S. officials saying that Congo is ready to give access to critical minerals. And we are talking about lithium, we're talking about coltan, we're talking about cobalt, in exchange for U.S. military support, strategic support, where we will have U.S. military bases officially in DRC, even though they are already operating there through Congolese military bases. Now, they want them to have the military base in the Congo, but also providing them with a project of developing the banana port, which is a deepwater sea port that the Congolese government has been trying to build with UAE support as well, right? And guaranteeing that American companies will have preferential access to Congo's minerals and they will be able to ship it out. Is this a new idea? Is it already happening? We know it's already happening through the Lobito corridor, right? The US has put billions of dollars to make sure that railroads leaving the southern part of Congo go through Zambia all the way to Angola in the Lobito port, taking Congo's copper, taking Congo's cobalt. That's already unfolding. So they are presenting it in a way where the elite of the Congo, they're saying, well, we can even give you a better deal, right? And get access to that. Now, there are some problems with that. That's why in the beginning I started explaining how is it that a senator of the Congo can go and speak to a lobby firm without consultation in the parliament. There hasn't been discussion within Congolese parliament about giving away our resources. What gives him the power to give away the resources of the country on behalf of the Congolese government when he's only a senator without any discussion? And that has been the framework of Congo since 1885. The Congolese people are not consulted around those decisions. And from what I'm seeing so far for the past week is that the United States government is actually interested in this deal. And there are some discussion that is ongoing, which if it's concluded and that this deal is happening, it will be the same thing, that the Congolese people are not involved in the decision-making process when the elites are actually doing this to protect their interests. And I believe, even in the context of the conflict, that's where I say it's quite dialectical what is happening in DRC. On one hand, we have Congo's neighbors attacking the Congolese people, causing the millions of deaths. On the other hand, we actually have the elite of the Congo who also want to make sure that the conflict ends, not for the interest of the people, but if they survive, right? If the Tshisekedi regime survives, with the US support, we are seeing the creation of a new Mobutu, Mobutu Sese Seko, a dictator who was in Congo for the past 32 years, supported by the United States. If people remember, when he did his coup in 1965, the US supported him to quell the rebellion, to get access to Congo's cobalt during the Cold War, during that time. So that is the framework. It's a repeat of history that people should, as we are analyzing the situation, they should always keep in mind. In everything that is happening, where are the Congolese people? What do Congolese people want? One, they want the end to the conflict. Two, they want to be able to choose their leader through an electoral process where that is not affected. Three, the ideals of Lumumba, they want to make sure that whenever we are extracting our mineral resources, before it benefits the Tesla of the world, the Apple of the world, that these mineral resources are actually honest, right? To build the roads, to build the hospital, to build the education system of the Congo so that the people of the Congo benefit and the African continent. If the framework is not placed for the Congolese, we'll continue to see Western nations being the firefighters, being actually the arsonist, and coming back as the firefighter to put down the fire when we know that it's the same force that exploded that's causing the death, and now are trying to be presented as the saviors of the Congo.
No, I think that's a really important point, and I think we've seen a lot of this, recently. I mean, we've seen a lot of the UK, Canada, other countries become more critical of Rwanda in this context, but in many ways it kind of seems like, kind of playing both sides against the middle in terms of how this is looking, especially when we look at what happened with the UN resolution where, and it seems to me, you tell me if you think I'm wrong, Kambale, but looking at that resolution, even though it's couched in a lot of criticism of all sides, including Rwanda, the actual solution seems to be very close to what Paul Kagame himself has been advocating for, which is this, quote unquote, direct negotiation between M23 and DRC. So some of it feels like it kind of looks one way, but the substance of it is maybe something of a diplomatic victory for Rwanda, at least, to some degree, at least.
To some degree, yes. But there are also three important, maybe a few important things that happen in the resolution. It was voted unanimously with 3 African nations who were part of the Security Council, right? That one gives a sense that regardless of some of the challenges of the resolution, that we do have Africans who are recognizing that not the M23, but the Rwandan Defense Forces are in the Congo. And that's a very important point to make, because in the press, we keep hearing M23. As I've always said, for all intents and purposes, the M23 is the Rwandan Defense Force. So when we see that element, right, why would you negotiate with the M23 when in your resolution, you are saying that the Rwandan Defense Forces are in DRC, right? So what's very important for people to really understand that we must have the Rwandan military out of the DRC. The second element is the sophisticated weaponry that the Rwandan military is using in the Congo comes from Western nations. Poland sold to Rwanda with European Union taxpayers' money, right? Because Europe gave Rwanda 20 million euros for military support. And then Rwanda used it to buy an anti-drone radar. Rwanda has sent surface-to-air missile and so on. So when we see all the support that Rwanda is actually getting from the West, and then you see the resolution, direct sanctions is not enough. We have to hold the corporations selling the weapons to them. It's not just Rwanda. Rwanda is a creation of Western power. So as we dilute the information to the M23, it becomes a Congolese problem. But if we put pressure on Western nations, and they have created the monster that we call the Rwandan government of Paul Kagame, we must put pressure on the European nation, the United States, to stop supporting dictators. So for people who are organizing around the Congo, to be clear, this is what's needed at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Well, go ahead, Eugene. No? Yes?
No, please, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. My internet was like hiccuping. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Whew, that's relief. Kambale, I'm just curious if now that we're well into a new Trump administration and we've kind of been experiencing for the last several months this sort of whiplash effect, and then I see the word deal being thrown around and what we were just talking about, like a mineral deal. I'm just curious if you think that that's going to play a role at all, especially the fact that Elon Musk is involved in that administration. Cobalt's very important to electronic cars. Do you think that's going to play a role in maybe them at some point focusing on Congo in a different way than past administrations have? Not in a good way, obviously. But are there concerns there?
I'm very concerned on the U.S. engagement in the Congo. As I said, they are trying to present the U.S. engagement in the Congo as the people who are going to put down the fire when they're actually the arsonists, right? And if you look at Elon Musk post on X last week, you will know that he actually posted on the Congo, right? He retweeted a pro-Republican influencer called Mario, I forgot his last name, who just interviewed Paul Kagame, and he made posts about the ADF. And the retweet of Musk was around the ADF, the Allied Democratic Forces, which means to me, right, if that's what Elon Musk is retweeting with the influence that he has, is that the U.S. Government may look at the situation in the Congo in the context of ISIS, right? The ADF, the U.S. for many years have been saying that this is a ISIS link terrorists. And we know what that means, right? That will mean having, again, the so-called war on terror coming into the DRC, supporting an oppressive regime, and so on. But that is not what the Congo needs. That's one level. The second level is this proposal that the DRC is doing, the DRC government is trying to present to the U.S. government, also has to have a historical background. Even though the DRC government is not as progressive as Patrice Lumumba, but something similar happened under Lumumba. Patrice Lumumba, as soon as he was elected the prime minister of the Congo, within weeks, there was an uprising backed by the Belgians, right, and supported the CIA to overthrow him. He flew into Washington. If you read his visit in Washington, he met U.S. investors. There were U.S. investors who were ready to actually fund the building of a dam. Right? You could see articles in the New York Times talking about how he met different U.S. investors who made commitments. But that was in the position of Dwight Eisenhower, right? And he used that same strategy. He came to Washington and said, hey, I'm going to open my arms. Please help me stop this rebellion backed by Belgium. Dwight Eisenhower did not even meet him. State Department official actually met Patrice Lumumba. And in the end, we saw that Congo was left pretty much alone to figure out a solution. And he engaged with the USSR. The USSR, a member of the UN Security Council at the time, who saw an African nation in trouble and decided to engage. The action of the USSR committing to engage in quelling the rebellion is what the US used as a pretext to kill him, right? And collaborating with Belgium and others to kill Patrice Lumumba. When we're looking at the situation now, even a strategy, right? As I said, they're not the Patrice Lumumba, is the strategy to believe that you can go to the United States at the weak point to have a fair deal. But we have a solution on the African continent right now. We had Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, 3 countries with so-called jihadists supported by Western nations, allegedly, right? Causing insecurity in these nations. These nations did not go and make a deal with the United States. They relied on their people. The grassroots movement within these countries created a force so strong that the military leaders who are leading that have to listen to the population. So we know that today, not in the Lumumba time, that the solution is to rely on your people. So when you see the DRC government not doing that, then you know they never represented the Congolese people, that their fight is more to retain power. But rest assured, the Congolese have been denouncing that. There is a civil society group in the Katanga province that put out an open letter to Tshisekedi saying, we the Congolese people, one, we were not informed about this process. And we are against taking away the minerals. But in the press, no one is talking about that the Congolese civil society organizations have denounced this deal. Not one organization. It's a whole coalition of organizations working in the mining sector saying that the resources of the Congo should be for the Congolese people. Unfortunately, their voices are not heard, but I am so certain, as difficult as the situation in the Congo is, today, many people around the world are hearing about the Free Congo movement. They're becoming much more aware that there has been a propaganda around the conflict in the Congo. Paul Kagame is being expose more Yoweri Museveni, and people are understanding more the challenge of the Congolese internally, as they are ruled by people who are only following their own interest. So as we continue to educate people about the situation and reminding them to join the Congolese in the struggle, I am so sure that Congo will be free in our lifetime. And we just have to keep fighting for the people of the Congo to be free. And of course, every oppressed person in the world has to be free, including our people in Palestine as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, as always, Kabale Musavulian, analyst with the Center for Research on the Congo-Kinshasa, thank you so much for some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Rania?
Well, Eugene, it's stands to be seen what happens next, but I'm glad that we here at Breakthrough News I gotta say, of all progressive media, we are always covering all parts of the global south. We don't leave anybody out, especially Africa.
That's
whether
true.
It's the Sahel, whether it's Congo, whether it's the Horn, whether it's South Africa. I mean, I want to point that out because I am proud that our outlet does that when so much of Africa just gets ignored, like it doesn't even exist or something.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. Even most progressive media or left media, doesn't get it done. But I have to say, whenever I'm in
1.4 billion people, 1.4 billion people in the world are on the African continent.
Indeed.
It's just crazy that it gets ignored.
Youngest continent of any of them around the world, too. So very important, and I agree with you. I think it's a great piece of what we do and a good reason to continue to financially support us if you can. We're going to turn now to China, where the two sessions, which is the yearly legislative meeting with the National People's Congress alongside the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, so a very important issue in the lawmaking, rulemaking, trend setting as it is in terms of where China is going year to year, has just wrapped up. So to talk about what happened at the two sessions this year, we are very honored to be joined on the show once again by Amanda Yee, who, among other things I could list, is the host of the China Report that you can also find here on Breakthrough News. Amanda, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me. Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, obviously, there's a lot we could say. We could probably do a whole show about this, but the two sessions, major event, of course, every year in terms of what the direction is going to be in China. A lot of different things were heard for people, I'm sure, who maybe saw some of this or following this. One that I noted, which is, of course, not one that's ever picked up on in the Western media, but very consistently in the lead up to and during the actual two sessions themselves, was the context and the concept of putting people first being the cornerstone of all of the policies that the Chinese government and supporters should be carrying out moving forward. Give us a sense of what that really means concretely, this idea of putting people first, and what do you think it says about the legislative direction of China?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to talk more about the specific policies, but I think I want to sort of set the foundation for what the two sessions is and how it represents what's called whole process people's democracy in China, right? So as you said, the two sessions refers to this annual back-to-back meetings of two of China's major political bodies, the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, the CPCC, which is its top advisory body, and the National People's Congress, the NPC, which is China's legislature. So as you said, it sets the political and economic plans and priorities for the following year, as well as overall policy direction. So this year was especially important because China is approaching the conclusion of its 14th five-year plan. 2025 marks the conclusion of that five-year plan. And so recommendations were gathered for the 15th five-year plan, which runs from 2026 to 2030. And so the two sessions, the back-to-back meetings, they kicked off on March 5th with the delivery of what's called the Government Work Report, which was delivered by Premier Li Tiang in front of the opening meeting of the NPC. So the Government Work Report sets the economic and development tasks for the upcoming year, and then the NPC and the CPPCC gather to discuss the work report. They gather to discuss any proposed legislation and other items on the agenda. So drafting of the Government Work Report is a really good window into what they call whole process people's democracy in China, which I mentioned earlier. So the drafting of this report started last year, and it involved public consultation with Chinese citizens, discussions with leaders of smaller political parties, discussions with experts in different fields. And so there were also online platforms that were set up where Chinese citizens could go online and give suggestions through these online platforms. And so the report was drafted, redrafted, and the final report incorporated thousands of suggestions from people in different sectors, as well as millions of suggestions that were gathered online. And this is how the lawmakers are made aware of the specific needs of the people and how they plan to design these policies to meet those needs. So this year's two sessions brought together 3,000 NPC deputies and over 2,000 CPPCC members from diverse backgrounds. There were farmers, physicians, scientists, factory workers, and they were all chosen to represent different sectors of policy work, represent different regions, and represent different backgrounds. So, for instance, during two sessions, when they're deliberating policy over, say, healthcare or medicine, you have elected representatives from the CPPCC who are themselves healthcare workers acting as advisors on those policies. If you're deliberating policy over agriculture, you have farmers advising on said policy. And it's really such a stark contrast to the US, where laws are pretty much dictated and made in the interests of lobbyists and billionaires and CEOs, right? People in the US typically think of China as this authoritarian state, but the drafting of the government work report and how its agenda is deliberated during the two sessions, how those policies are set, shows you how democracy is practiced in action in China.
That's really incredible, considering the way China is depicted in the U.S. media, which is why I'm so happy we have the China report to fill us in on these sorts of things, Amanda. But I wanted to ask you about the rising U.S. hostilities and increasing technological competition specifically, because a lot of this discussions at these meetings was about China's investment in AI. And I have to say, on a personal note, I've used ChatGPT. I've used DeepSeek, and there are some things that objectively I do like about ChatGPT more, like features that DeepSeek doesn't have. But I will say DeepSeek has better bedside manner. It uses emojis, and I'm not joking. It's nice. Eugene, I don't care. Go ahead and shake your head. Politeness means something to me, and cheerfulness means something to me. But no, I mean, I've used both of them, and I've kind of compared and contrast from everything from I don't know, give me a recipe to what do you how can I make my workout better? Help me refine this. And DeepSeek is really, really, really impressive on a number of levels. But that just brings me back to the question I want to ask you, which is China's investment in AI and the fact that it's not even had to invest as much as the U.S. had and still come out with really excellent products. How does that position it in this global race for tech dominance? And then what challenges does it face from Western opposition? Because we know, the West does not play fair. The Americans don't play fair. And they always try to sabotage whenever a country like China does something better than they do.
Yeah, I mean, at two sessions, China really emphasized that, nothing was going to stop its development. And its development is very much kind of wrapped up in the development of AI. And the government work report that I was talking about earlier, it designated the development of what's called new quality productive forces as a major prioritization in 2025. So focusing on biomanufacturing, quantum technology, AI, and 6G telecommunications. And this idea of new quality productive forces is a really important one. It was introduced by Xi Jinping in 2023. And at the heart of it is scientific and technological advancement, right? It refers to this kind of innovation-driven development that moves China up the manufacturing value chain so that they lessen their dependency on Western technology. And through that, it hopes to help China reach the level of modernization that's enjoyed by these more developed countries. So new quality productive forces harness technology like automation, robotics, and smart technology as the primary means of achieving this kind of economic growth. And it's through this innovation in technology and the development of society that it brings that will eventually lay the foundation for China to enter what it calls the middle stage of socialism by 2050, where the main economic and social development indexes of China we'll be close to or at the level of the more advanced countries, where the Chinese people can enjoy a higher standard of living, of public services, and social security. And then from there, the next step, they plan to chart a path forward to becoming what they call a highly developed socialist country by the year 2078, which would be the 100-year anniversary of the beginning of economic reforms and opening up that started in 1978, right? So, as such, as we mentioned, one major area of focus at two sessions was AI, the development of AI, how to lessen dependency on Western technology, but also how to deploy AI in the service of people's needs. They talked about how to foster the growth of industries, including AI robotics, how to support the extensive application of large-scale AI models, and develop things like AI-enabled phones and computers, like how to develop AI tech to improve, also how to develop AI to improve stuff like agriculture and manufacturing and those kinds of industries. And one thing that they talked about was also how to expand the use of AI to improve healthcare, how to improve drug research, right? At two sessions, the policymakers discussed how to use this AI tech to take on more comprehensive research tasks to drive the development of the pharmaceutical and healthcare sectors. They discussed how to use AI to take up the more menial healthcare administrative tasks, like medical record processing, image analysis, and data management. And again, these policies were not deliberated by pharmaceutical or tech CEOs or lobbyists. They were taken up by actual pharmacists and doctors and healthcare workers. At the same time, there was discussion on how to democratize AI, how to bridge the tech divide and prevent this kind of tech innovation from becoming only like the domain of rich countries and the wealthy. There was a lot of discussion around how to address the misuse of AI, how to establish these kinds of industry norms and regulations to prevent misuse in the form of deepfake scams, and how to expand the legal frameworks to address its misuse while still fostering its growth. So I think these discussions are really important because, AI is here to stay, right? It's just a matter of how we can harness it to serve the people's needs, right? While Israel uses AI in the service of genocide, while the US uses AI to expand its massive surveillance state, I think China provides a good example of how we can harness it responsibly in a regulated way in service of the people's needs.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that issue, the people's needs, and you also mentioned healthcare as well. I mean, you also mentioned the contrast between the U.S. and China. One area that seems relevant in this year's two sessions is, of course, senior citizens. Of course, here in the United States, there's a discussion about destroying the lives of senior citizens by cutting Social Security. But there, obviously, the issue of the gray economy, services for elderly people, quality of life for senior citizens was a big topic also in terms of both technology and just general policy. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that because I thought it was a very, another interesting contrast between the political debates in the two countries.
No, that's true. China has this rapidly aging population, and it's been very proactive in responding to their care. At two sessions, political advisors and lawmakers, they brought forward a number of proposals on how to further develop elderly care programs, how to address the current shortage in specialized personnel for elderly medical care, and just how to overall improve the medical and insurance systems to better respond to the full cycle of a person's life. And I think elderly care, again, provides another example of how China is making technology work in service of the people. In addition to improving human caregiver training, they are creating robotics to provide elderly care. So this is actually an area of focus they're discussing to put in their 15th five-year plan. They're talking about how to better develop robots to aid the elderly in daily living assistance, in house chores, in cleaning, in mobility, and walking around, and just how to use them to improve elderly citizens' overall quality of life. on top of that, there was also discussion about, strengthening care and services for children. There were proposals that were set forth for providing childcare subsidies, increasing public interest in childcare services. There was a special focus in particular of, children, how to better provide services to children in remote areas, especially and like children of migrant workers as well. And so they announced a 3-year plan for strengthening education that includes eventually making preschool education free. So these discussions around taking care of children and the elderly, they really struck me because in the US, as you said, Eugene, we're facing the very real possibility of major cuts to Medicaid and Social Security. And the way that China responds to the needs and care of their most vulnerable populations, it really says something about that government's priorities, right? And like on top of all this, one area of discussion in two sessions that I didn't see a lot of news coverage of, that I thought was really interesting was they also brought proposals, kind of deliberating how to provide better protections for delivery and gig workers. So a number of proposals that were put forward, addressed better Social Security coverage for these workers. And it's China right now is kind of trying to address this problem of exploitation of these delivery drivers by these tech platforms. And, they've recently really cracked down on these delivery apps and their exploitative algorithms. And this is another way that they're trying to better protect the rights of these gig workers. And of course, this is all to say that these are all different ways that the government continues to put people first. And I do think it's having very tangible results, right? It's worth mentioning that last week, China just announced that their average life expectancy has increased to 79 years of age.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this is the average for the entire country, but in some provinces, we're seeing an average life expectancy of about 80 years old. So that kind of remarkable achievement is only made possible through this kind of planning and these kinds of policies that put people ahead of short-term profit.
No, wow, that's notable. Life expectancy, which I think is the most important social fact of all time. If you live a long time, things seem to be going well. Well, Amanda Yee, there's all sorts of many more things we could say, but the good thing is we have the China Report, of which you were one of the hosts, so people should be checking out all the episodes of that. We really appreciate you, as always, giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks a lot.
Rania?
Well, Eugene, I hear that, and then I think about my own parents who are older, especially my dad. And I mean, I've talked to you about this a lot. We're actually going to be bringing my dad to Lebanon because Medicare does not cover everything that he needs. And it's just not dignified, and it's just crazy. You pay into a system your whole life that's supposed to take care of you when you're old, and it doesn't really.
No. It does not. I mean, it doesn't even include dental and vision coverage, as if when you get older, somehow your eyes and your teeth. So forget if something serious happens. I mean, it's amazing. But we'll circle back around to that. But before we go to our next guest, Rania, I wanted to ask you maybe with many questions all wrapped in one question. Obviously, there's a lot happening right now in Syria, these massacres that have been happening. You've been following it closely. You've been talking to people on the ground. I mean, you had a long deep dive with Elijah just a couple days ago. So, of course, people can watch that for an hour. But I just wanted to ask you, for the people who are maybe casually following it, and just sort of seeing various headlines, like what do you think people need to know about what's really happening right now in these Alawite regions where they're probably just seeing people are dying and, the government is basically good? I think that's probably the sum total of a lot of the headlines.
Well, that's even it's being covered. I've talked to a few people who weren't aware of how bad it was or what was really going on in Syria because it actually hasn't received that much coverage. No, I understand, the Trump effects means that, there's a lot of things happening domestically in the U.S. that is kind of, getting more attention. Regardless, a few months ago, you had the fall of the Bashar al-Assad, and he was replaced by this guy called Ahmed al-Sharaa, formerly called Mohammed al-Jolani, who was literally the head of al-Qaeda in Syria, who the media has completely whitewashed. I mean, it's insane. And I've done.
He was also in ISIS too, right?
He was a deputy emir in
Amazing.
ISIS, and then it's just his career is insane. His CV is like Islamic State, Al Qaeda, like literally.
Wow.
I'm not making that up,
Right.
you know. It's just
Right.
and saying that gets you called an Assadist because people don't want you to know reality. That is the reality. Forget Assad. He's not in charge anymore. There is no Assad government anymore. Now this man is in charge. He came on the coattails of Turkey after years and years of U.S. destabilization, sanctions, destruction of Syria, proxy war that we've covered on Breakthrough News a lot. But all that's to say, so it's been 4 months, right? It's been 4 months since this new government has come into power, led by the man who you see the B-roll of, Ahmed al-Sharaa. And, you know, he's done a good job rebranding. The entire Western mainstream media has helped him. All of these diplomats have come to visit. And the reason people like me and others and you as well were concerned about the fact that this is who was taking over is because they have a very sectarian ideology, one that is literally genocidal towards minorities and people and towards non-Sunnis, and then towards also Sunnis who don't, abide by the same Islamic law they do. Everybody was like, oh, you're making a big deal. You're making a big deal. Chill out. Give these people a chance. Okay, we gave them a chance. And 4 months in, what happened is horrific sectarian massacres carried out by essentially death squads that are under the control, or supposed to be under the control, of this man, Ahmed al-Sharaa, who's claiming like he doesn't know how this happened, doesn't have any control over these people that fall under his command. Who spent days, and there still are, by the way, going into coastal Alawite villages and murdering people, murdering families, murdering men, door to door, like literally entire families. People have lost like 15 family members in some cases. It's disgusting. It's horrific. No one's really been able to go see how extensive the damage and death and destruction is because HTS is still doing it. It all started, because there was what they call Assad remnants. I mean, Assad remnants is basically like the new Hamas. It's like when Israel says it's Hamas. It gives them a blank check as far as they see it to just murder any Palestinians they want, whether they're doctors, whether they're journalists, whether they're entire families. As long as you say Hamas, it's fine. It's justified. The Assad remnants makes it justifiable to kill all Alawites. That's what's happening here. They basically are labeling all Alawites as Assad remnants so they can kill them and cleanse them because of ideology, not even because of revenge towards the prior regime. So, maybe some of that is there, fine. But then why are there Uzbeks and Chechens and people that have no reason to feel they have to get revenge against the regime, who aren't even Syrian, like bloodlustingly going and killing entire families and saying that they're doing it because they're Alawite and they hate Alawites and want to kill them all? This is on video. I'm not making this up. This is not he said, she said. There is video evidence of this happening for days and days and days. The death toll is being estimated to be over 1,000. Some people are saying 2,000, maybe 3,000. It's not clear. Not just Alawites. I mean, some Christians have been killed too, though the target has specifically been Alawites. And me and Elijah go in depth about, why maybe the U.S. is okay with that, why the Europeans don't really care, because they essentially see, Alawites as being potential Iran allies. And so they don't really care. I mean, it's really sad. This is a community that has no leadership to protect them anywhere in the world. They're completely vulnerable. Part of that is Bashar al-Assad's fault because he didn't let them have any leadership rise because he was the leader. But all that's to say, there was all these people who were talking, before the overthrow of Assad, that Alawites are the ones who suffer the most under him, right? And there was some truth to that too, by the way. Alawites are extremely poor. Like a lot of the villages that have been invaded and people have been killed, they're like really poor villages. These are poor villagers and farmers. Some of them now fleeing into Lebanon, having to cross rivers with their families, more Syrians being made refugees. And so all of these think tankers who are going on about how the Alawites are so oppressed by Assad, where the hell are you now? Because you know what's happening with think tankers in DC? They're justifying this. They're dismissing this. They're excusing this. And some of them are saying they deserve it. It's really horrific to see. And Eugene, I'm sorry if I'm getting a little emotional here, but after a year and a half of genocide and watching live streamed Holocaust out of Gaza, it just feels like Western imperialism has turned this region that I live in and that my family comes from into a producer of snuff films. Like, it just doesn't end. It's like month after month is just videos of people being dismembered and being killed in the most depraved, horrific ways imaginable. And here it is again, now happening in Syria, and something that was totally preventable, and something that is largely the fault of all of these countries around the world that armed and funded a bunch of sectarian militias who are now running the country of Syria. And, you know, it's unclear if Alawites have a place in a future Syria. It's unclear what will happen with other minorities. And now, you know, you have Ahmed al-Sharaa declaring a transitional period of him being in charge for 5 years. He initially said 4 years. Now it's 5 years. So he's just adding years. Fine. And also whatever he just signed in terms of this transitional constitution is all about implementing Islamic law and looking to Islamic law for women's rights. I mean, things that I find really problematic. And it's just unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And maybe I shouldn't be surprised, but it still shocks me that people will excuse murder like this in the most disgusting ways. And use, I mean, it sounds like the way the Israelis talk about Palestinians.
Yeah, no, it really does. It's unbelievable. I mean, some of the videos are just harrowing that are coming out. And then, I mean, the other side of this coin, I don't know if it's the other side, but is that Israel also has essentially taken over southern Syria. I mean, I read the most unbelievable article with the Times of Israel the other day. You know, they took a little like press junket of Israeli journalists like into the parts of Syria they occupied, and they're just like openly telling them like, we have a zone of influence that goes all the way to Damascus that basically no one we do not approve will be allowed to be in this area. And I mean, it's just. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, it's in a way not shocking because obviously we know this is their strategy, but it is shocking because it's like happening right here in real time that, you know, the country's being dismembered. Israel's just taking over huge parts of it. There's massacres happening, you know, in the Alawite population. I mean, it really is.
And HTS is not doing anything. I mean, Ahmed al-Sharaa doesn't want to confront the Israelis. He's letting the Israelis take massive parts of Syria. He doesn't care. He's barely commented on it. There was a recent Reuters interview with him a few days ago. It was a fluff piece, by the way, in the midst of sectarian massacres that he is basically leading, because the people doing it he's their leader. In the midst of that, Reuters went and did this like fluff interview with him, and they were talking about how he has this really soft voice. It's almost like a whisper, and he's whatever, so dreamy, I guess.
Yeah.
But essentially, they asked him about the Israel factor, and he dismissed it. He said it's nonsense. They quoted an Israeli official talking about their plans in Syria, and he called it nonsense. And that's all he had to say, to call it nonsense. Meanwhile, he's got his people driving up to the coast, just mass murdering Alawites. That's what he's interested in doing. I mean, it's disgusting. It's a testament to, honestly, the effectiveness of sectarianism that has been pushed in this region by the U.S. and its regional allies to promote through religious ideology the hatred of America's enemies and basically shrugging the shoulders towards the actual enemies of this region, which are imperialism, practiced first and foremost through the country of Israel.
Yeah, no, I think that's very well put. I mean, going all the way back to Sykes-Picot before, I mean, they knew what they were doing. I mean, it's all the way back to the Roman Empire. You know, divide and conquer is the most effective way to establish your imperium, and they've been doing it for quite some time, and they're continuing to do it and continuing to push it in all sorts of different ways. I mean, it's a sort of slightly separate theater, but it actually is connected. You can see what the U.S. is kind of signaling towards with Somalia, with sort of breaking it apart in different ways that, you know, really sort of rely on sort of like clan differences, so not exactly the same as ethnic, but similar sort of space, and the entire kind of West Asia, North Africa area. And it's obvious why they want that, because it's such a critically important area for everything. I mean, it's the crossroads of the world, and it has been for 2,000 years. And so ultimately, you know, if you want to control the world, you got to find a way to control that area. But it really is disgusting. I mean, it really is just, you don't even know what to say sometimes when you see some of the stuff that's coming out, because it is so terrible. But I agree with you. It's not being covered well or enough whatsoever in terms of what's going on. It's sort of, back page news, and you think it would move to the front, and hopefully it does.
And also, I want to say something. I want to add something. I know a lot of people hated the prior Syrian government. I think a lot of Syrians did. I mean, obviously there was a lot of euphoria in Syria when Assad fell. So, I mean, no one should deny that, right? There was Ba'athist rule for a very long time, and now it's over. And a lot of people are happy about that. Fine. So criticizing Mohammed al-Jolani / Ahmed al-Shara, opposing massacres of minorities, it's okay to do those things. Doing those things, it doesn't mean Assad's going to come back. It's like there's this fear or something that if you say that what's happening in Syria now is bad, it somehow means you're like paving the way for the prior regime to come back. They're not coming back. Assad's gone. There's no point in calling people Assadists. There's no such thing as an Assadist. It doesn't mean anything. This isn't somebody who had an ideology. He was the leader of a country for a very long time, and now he's not the leader of that country anymore. Somebody else is, and there's a reality playing out under that new leadership that is incredibly destructive, and that is being controlled by a lot of outside forces. And being honest about that doesn't change or mean that it's going to go back to how it was. It seems to be like there's a fear factor there. And there's I just don't understand. You don't have to defend Mohammed al-Jolani. You don't have to put your money behind that guy. He's not a good guy. I'm just utterly shocked to see people repeatedly doing that. And then there is an attempt to really to continue to smear people over Syria, in a ridiculous way. I mean, Eugene, I used to have a Wikipedia page, and then they had to actually they had to delete it because pro-Jolani people kept vandalizing it years ago. And so I guess someone made a new page. I noticed I had a new Wikipedia page. And I went and looked at it. And, Eugene, you've seen how many episodes of my show I do. You've seen what the career I've had. You and I are colleagues. We've been on reporting trips to war zones together. We've been on reporting trips to Latin America together. I've covered more than just the Middle East. The vast majority of my Wikipedia page is made up of my visits to Syria. It's literally in my career section. It's Syria 2016, visit to Syria 2019. And I'm just are you really still doing this? It's unbelievable. It's my career is just, I went to Syria a couple times and pissed people off.
Yeah.
And the people who want me and others to shut up about the fact that the person in charge of Syria now is overseeing sectarian massacres want to continue to smear people who are telling the truth about what's going on in quite a nuanced way, I would add. So anyways, I just wanted to throw that out there, that I think that for that reason, a lot of people are scared to speak out on Syria because they see the kind of smears and just reputation massacre that people endure, including people like me, and they don't want to have to deal with it themselves, and it's a confusing situation, and it's scary to be called the kinds of names that, people like you or I get called for just telling the truth about what's happening on the ground in a place.
Well, let's stick here with West Asia in a general sense, but slightly shift our focus here to Palestine, where, of course, there have been many, many developments on one of the key fronts of the struggle in solidarity with Palestinian people, which is to prevent people from speaking out in favor of the Palestinian cause in the United States and all across Europe. It really has become almost an epidemic of repression of free speech, you might say. Very happy to be joined as we continue this conversation by Nora Barrows-Friedman, who is a reporter and associate editor of the fantastic Electronic Intifada. Nora, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you so much, comrades. It's so good to see you.
Well, it's great to see you. It's great to have you. Obviously, there's so much to reflect on. I was thinking a couple hours ago, thinking about this interview and everything that's happening with Mahmoud Khalil and just the broader attack on campuses. There's obviously two sides to it, because it's obviously terrible and completely ridiculous and totally unconstitutional in the case of what they've done to Mahmoud, at least in my opinion. But it also does, to me, reveal something else I think is interesting, Nora, and that is how important the encampments were in driving the discussion around Palestine, that now there's a whole of government effort to prevent anything like that ever happening again. So that also felt notable to me in terms of how we frame this. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, I think that was the point of the encampments and of the student intifada in general, was to make it to really kind of put a wrench into the system of these institutional relationships with the Israeli war machine here on U.S. soil. At a place like Columbia, I mean, students have been, and it's not just, been since last year, but for decades, students have been fighting to get Columbia to stop participating in Israeli apartheid and in the ongoing occupation of Palestine just for so long. There have been many ways in which students have participated in the boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign, especially at Columbia and at, neighboring universities in New York and across the country. And so the encampments last year were to bring that issue to the fore and to really challenge the Columbia administration and the Biden administration politically on their efforts to, purport to be bastions of free speech and academic freedom and freedom of inquiry, and really put their feet to the fire and say, if you believe in those tenets, which are, objectively good tenets, as a university should have, then why are you complicit with the genocide in Gaza? And what the Columbia administration decided to do in response was to enact the most draconian, anti-free speech measures on their own students, on certain members of faculty, to say, you can't talk about our relationship with Israel. You can't say the word Palestine without, getting punished. And we're going to enforce that with the New York City Police Department to come and beat you up. It's just been absolutely horrific to see the response by these university administrators working on behalf of Democratic lawmakers last year, and now working to enforce Trump's, anti-free speech policies. So it's just, it's shameful. It's shameful.
I'm really glad that you mentioned, Nora, the Democratic role here, because obviously what Donald Trump and Marco Rubio are doing is like a bit on steroids, but the Democrats laid the foundation for everything that we're witnessing take place right now. They laid the foundation because they were in charge when everything you just mentioned was happening at this time last year. When they started using police against protesters. And in some cases, like, for example, in UCLA, basically police like letting actual fascists come onto campus and beat up and almost kill people over these encampments. There's obviously been a lot of pressure from very powerful individuals with lots of money, people like Bill Ackman at the forefront, pushing lawmakers in both parties to, police, we basically use stormtroopers against the students of America, against the young people of America. And of course, we saw what happened at Columbia last year. And, this is like a new chapter in all of this, because in this case, and something you guys have covered at the Electronic Intifada, is the Columbia administration is complicit in in ICE coming onto campus, on campus housing, and essentially kidnapping Mahmoud Khalil. And, they have done nothing to protect their students, and their international students are so vulnerable to the point where, you can correct me on this, it was something like the Pulitzer Center at Columbia. Whoever the guy who Jelani Cobb, who heads the Pulitzer Center, told international
He's the dean
students
of the journalism school.
Told them, hey, sorry, you guys just need to go delete anything you said about the Middle East on the internet. It's too controversial of a topic. It's better just to say nothing at all. What kind of country is this?
Yes.
What kind of free speech is this?
We can't protect you. That's what he said. Sorry, we can't protect you. The dean of the journalism school.
As if they don't have the ability to do something, by the way. These people can choose to do more than tell them we can't protect you. They're leaving these kids to fend for themselves. It's completely outrageous. And now you have a situation where Mahmoud Khalil is in ICE detention in Louisiana. he is a green card holder. I mean, and honestly, like, the more I look at this case, and I'm sure you probably feel the same way, the more you see, like, there's no way this will stand up. I mean, I knock on wood when I say that because you never know. But legally speaking, this can't possibly stand up to scrutiny, but they're basically torturing this kid to make a show of it. And anyways, that's a lot of commentary for me. It's just utterly shocking. And I'm watching this happen from Lebanon. I'm just like, what the hell, man?
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm just curious your thoughts on the lack of protection for students who got admitted to these universities, who are assets to these universities, and what it means, generally speaking, about the culture in American academia moving forward.
Yeah, no, I agree with your commentary there. It is absolutely appalling, and it's also not entirely surprising. As someone who's been watching very carefully the machinations of higher education administrators over the last 15, 20 years, where universities, tout themselves as, like I said, these bastions of free speech. And, Columbia University itself has a whole, class dedicated to where it went wrong in 1968 in again, doing the thing that they just did last year and now, which is, throwing their students to the cops. So they tout themselves as these, progressive academic institutions of, very, I mean, Columbia, like every parent wants their kid to go to Columbia, or did, until recently. But really what they have become, and what they are proving that they have become, is really more like hedge funds for their massive endowments. I mean, Columbia itself has an endowment that's like, as big as the GDP of a small country. So protecting their endowments, protecting their donors, protecting their relationships to power, protecting their relationships to research institutions, like the ones developing weapons and surveillance technology in Israel, using Palestinians as really the lab rats for this new weapons technology that is sold by Israel to the United States, that is then used by the U.S. police around the country, and so I think really what the last year, but especially the last week, has really revealed is that these administrations really do not care about their students. I mean, as the Columbia School of Journalism, basically mandating, dictating to their journalism students that they should really shut up about Palestine. And if they have said anything on their social media about Palestine or Gaza in particular, then they should scrub it. And, the university can't protect you, and free speech really doesn't mean anything here. It really just reveals what these elite institutions have always been about all along. And that's about power. It's about money. It's about their investments. It's about their donors, and it's about their access to power. It was the Biden administration, and now it's the Trump administration, but the policies remain the same.
No, I think it's such a good point. I mean, yeah, I think $14 billion is the Columbia endowment. However, it is like 50. So like if they wanted to fight, obviously they could fight. You got $14 billion in the bank. You got nothing to worry about. But they're totally integrated into the top levels of imperialism in every way. And it's sad to see Jelani Cobb, who is a alumnus of Howard University, my alma mater, because the history of HBCUs was always to protect people against McCarthyism. Many of the academics who fled the Holocaust found work at HBCUs more so than other places who didn't want them because they were anti-Semitic in so many ways. So I know he knows all of that without even a shadow of a doubt. So to turn your back on it is a shame. And it does speak to, I think, the point you're making of the integration of these into power, of the importance of Palestine in the broader sort of geopolitical sort of calculus of, a handful of elites wanting to control the world. It reminds me of something that Alex Karp said, I think it was who's the head of Palantir. I think it was at the World Economic Forum at some point in 2024 or something like that. And he was like, we have to defeat these campus protests because if they win, we'll never be able to deploy U.S. troops to any country ever because it'll be like a victory for people who are against imperialism. And I thought it was a great mask-off moment, and it was somewhat true, but it shows how Palestine it's an issue in its own right that is so critically important, and we should never, I think, take away from that, but that really it's the entryway into many other issues and the fear that these people feel to see the elite institutions, the huge number of people in the streets, trade unions, which were traditionally, very pro-Israel, starting to shift a little bit, that Palestine has opened up this kind of broader fissure, I think, in a lot of these countries in the global north.
Yeah, I mean, it's really true. It's why, these Israel lobby organizations identified, maybe it was like 10 years ago, that U.S. campuses are the battleground. And this is why they have sunk so many, countless millions of dollars into propping up, these relationships with Israeli institutions, with funding, networks of Israel lobby organizations, kind of astroturfing as grassroots, student-led groups on campuses, encouraging those students to spy on other students and members of faculty who talk about Palestine. That's why they've identified campuses as the so-called battleground, because that is where people come to learn about the world and develop critical thought and really interrogate the U.S.'s relationships to these imperialist wars of occupation and colonialism, and so if God forbid the young students learn about what's happening in Palestine and then connect it to how their tuition dollars are being used to develop weapons that are killing people halfway around the world, they'll throw everything to try and stop that and convince politicians to take up the fight and really to make free speech a thing of the past. I mean, really just shredding the Constitution in all sorts of ways and being very proud to do so. It's remarkable.
It is.
Yeah, I mean, to affirm what you're saying in terms of the amount of resources that have put into turning college campuses into these battlegrounds. I mean, these Zionist organizations for more than a decade. And I mean, I used to cover it with you guys at the Electronic Intifada. Yeah. Like they would host conferences and meetings devoted exclusively, like really fancy conferences, devoted exclusively to strategizing about how to push back against the popularity of Palestine solidarity and activism on college campuses, and here we are. That's where this is coming from, in conjunction with imperialism. But specific to Mahmoud Khalil's case, Nora, I wanted to ask about a couple things here, because the unprecedented nature of this, there's a few angles to it. The one is using ICE and the deportation machine to politically persecute somebody. That's a new element here. But Trump's people have been warning about this, about deporting so-called Hamas supporters. And then the other angle is to address that, because they're basically saying this guy was supporting Hamas. I mean, there's literally zero evidence that's the case. But also that's what makes this a free speech case too, because technically you can say whatever you want in the U.S., even if it's supposedly, even if it's the most horrific thing. Like Nazis have been defended by constitutional lawyers in the U.S., not because the lawyers agreed with what Nazis are saying, but because espousing views, no matter what they are, no matter how vitriolic they might seem, not that I'm equating someone supporting Hamas to Nazis supporting Nazi stuff. I'm just saying the idea of the free speech in the U.S. is that you actually can say whatever the hell you want. That's one. Two, going after a green card holder, which is somebody who's supposed to have measures of protection that are basically like an American citizen. I mean, there's so much happening here. And then to go after Mahmoud of all people too, because they can't point to anything he said to even remotely try to suggest he's supported any group that's been prescribed by the U.S. as a terrorist organization whatsoever.
Yeah, this is a test, right? And Palestine has always been a test in terms of how far people are willing to go to defend the rights of people, either to speak or to exist as people. And here, in the case with Mahmoud Khalil, he was a very public-facing representative of the student movement. He was targeted by Columbia professors who doxed him and tried to smear him and denigrate his reputation. He asked Columbia administration for protection. I think the day before he was abducted by ICE goons. And yeah, as you said, he's a green card holder. That entitles him to all, basically all the constitutional protections that, American-born citizens have. And the government has been very open about making Mahmoud's case a precedent for other cases. They've already said, they've admitted that he had broken no laws, but that his viewpoints, his political opinion, was somehow a danger to the U.S.'s national security interests. And that kind of blanket statement, I think, should terrify everyone, especially people who, support the idea that Palestinians are a people and should have rights. Because as the U.S. government, no matter which administration you pick over the last 80 years, has tried to affirm, that Palestinians have no rights as people or as, students or anything. And they've said, now trashing the Constitution in order to deport Mahmoud Khalil, a green card holder, that's only going to, if they can get away with that, then they're going to start getting away with naturalized citizens, deporting naturalized citizens, or imprisoning, U.S.-born citizens because of their political speech. And that's terrifying. And university administrators, should be horrified that they are rolling out the red carpet for these kinds of anti-constitutional policies, that are using their tuition-paying students to be the first ones under attack. It's horrifying, and it only underscores. The fact that they're going after people who are expressing their political opinions and criticizing Israel and the U.S.'s genocide, the Holocaust against the Palestinian people. That if they were, it underscores how terrified the right wing and the Zionists are by people more and more coming to the conclusion that the U.S. and Israel are wrong, and that they are occupiers and genociders, and that their relationship as imperialist twins needs to be examined, and so I think it just kind of like it undergirds the frailty of the Zionist and U.S. Governmental positions. And this is why they're striking back at the most vulnerable populations this hard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, Nora, it was a pleasure, as always, to have you with us. Nora Barrows-Friedman, Associate Editor at the Electronic Intifada, which everyone needs to be following. Thank you so much for some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks, Eugene and Rania. Good to be here.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Eugene,
I think we'll keep it rolling here. Want to turn to another issue that's honestly wild. There's a lot of unrest in New York State prisons after there was a relatively brief wildcat strike of officers prison guards, I guess you should say, after they beat someone to death in one of the prisons. So a lot of different things happening here. Big issue in New York State, but hasn't made it out as much in the general media, but very important, I think, as it concerns mass incarceration here in the U.S. And we are very, very happy to be joined here by Hiram Rivera, who's a longtime organizer and the founding director of the Community Resource Hub for Safety and Accountability. Hiram, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, great to have you here. There's the thing that's, I think, really making the news in a way is the prison guards themselves. But I wanted to actually start, where this recent upsurge of prison guard activity started, which is where a number of guards, I think there was actually some medical officials involved, brutally beat Mr. Robert Brooks so badly that he ended up dying. So I was hoping you could just explain, what happened with his case that then has set off this sort of broader conflagration here.
Yeah, so Robert Brooks was a 43-year-old black man who on December 9th was beaten by a gang of corrections officers and ultimately choked to death, right? While being transferred from Mohawk Correctional Facility to Marcy Correctional Facility in Marcy, New York. And so in total, 13 officers and 2 nurses were fired. And since then, 6 officers have been charged with murder, gang assault, and manslaughter.
Mm.
It's just unbelievable, unfreaking believable. And, guards were complaining about their own safety, which they related to something called the HALT Act, which had changed some rules around solitary confinement. So is there any real correlation between these two things? And why was there a push for change in solitary policies in the first place?
Right. So the HALT Act is an act that was won by activists and organizers in New York State to put limitations on the use of solitary confinement in the New York correctional system. And basically, solitary confinement is deemed by United Nations as an act of torture. And so the fight to end solitary confinement in New York State, but across the country, has been a decades-long fight. Why it comes up now and why they're choosing the HALT Act is because they are trying, the corrections officers association. We don't call them unions. They refer to themselves as unions, but they're not really unions. Their benevolent association is using this as a way to interject, right, and intervene in the charging of the police officers. And so they're trying to avoid accountability for the murder of Robert Brooks. And what they're saying is that this HALT Act has caused an increase in violence against corrections officers inside of the prison system, right? And that if they were able to remove that HALT Act and go back to the use of solitary confinement the way they did, they'll be able to get more control over the prison system. The problem here is that it's not the issue of solitary confinement that's causing the problems inside the system. The system, one, is severely going through budget cuts and underfunding that has left the institutions all over the state understaffed. Maintenance is at a deplorable level. The facilities are falling apart. And this is causing a powder keg, right? Creating a powder keg inside of these institutions. And so when the prisoners themselves no longer have access to medical healthcare, mental health supports, all the things that they need, as well as corrections officers, because of the understaffing that comes as a result, are being given mandatory overtime and they're working excessive hours. You're putting these two groups together and it's causing a very serious scenario inside of the institution. Now, for the corrections officers themselves, what they want to do is they want to go back to what they've been doing for decades and brutally abusing and killing inmates at will, right? Excuse me, prisoners at will. And so what they're doing is they're using the attack on the HALT Act and they're lifting up the HALT Act as an excuse and as a demonstration to say, look, these prisons are so dangerous. These individuals in here are so dangerous, right, that our hands are tied. We're losing officers as a result. The Democratic governor doesn't care about us, right? And something needs to be done. In reality, what they're doing is they're trying to evade accountability for the murder of Robert Brooks, the precedent that could be set by charging these officers and sending them to prison, right? While at the same time also trying to squeeze benefits and larger budgets and pay increases out of the state government. The catch-22 with this and the irony in all this in terms of solitary confinement and the HALT Act is that those same corrections officers have also said that prisoners have been intentionally getting themselves put into solitary confinement because unfortunately that was the only way they were able to access mental health support, supports for their drug addiction, and all kinds of other benefits because the institutions have lost not only corrections officers, but again, nurses, medical staff, psychological supports, and all those things that were there in place to support prisoners.
I'm glad you're raising all these points, and it's such a multi-layered issue. And you mentioned the issue of accountability, which I think is a notable one. And as you had mentioned at the outset, things like the HOLT Act have, long-term organizing that was going on. So it almost seems like, and I think you spoke to this, how things were for decades, this is not really a new problem. That accountability is really the exception, not the rule. And that this, for those who are incarcerated in New York State, this has been a long-term battle to try to get, some level of protection from guards who are going well past their remit.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this has been a long, long time, right? And so right here we have two things. We have two things at play. Here it is the New York State prisoners struggle against abuses, right, of the correctional officers and the myth of the police union. And so the history of New York State prison struggles is long, and one key figure in that history stands out is Martin Sostre. Martin Sostre, the Black Puerto Rican activist and bookstore owner who became one of the country's foremost prison reformers behind the walls, right? And so Sostre, as an organizer and a jailhouse lawyer, successfully sued for prisoners' rights to be able to practice Islam in prison. He successfully sued then Governor Nelson Rockefeller over the use of solitary confinement. And he was, right, in his obituary, stated by the New York Times, the New York Times stated that because of his imprisonment and subsequent activities in prisons in America, and particularly in New York, they can never go back to the dark pits of repression and despair that they once were. Now, we know they still are those institutions, right? But that is the history of prisons in New York State and the history of the prison struggle going back to George Jackson in California and Attica in New Jersey. The second part that I was saying, the myth of police unions, is that police unions don't exist. Cops are not workers. Cops are tools of the state. They're the armed bodies of the state. They're tools of the ruling class in order to suppress, quell, and working class people outside the walls and behind the walls, and so also protect profit and property. And so the issue of accountability for officers is what brings us back to why we started this conversation in the first place. And so the charges brought against them, right, and the possibility of being held accountable is being used by these institutions, these benevolent associations, these fraternal orders that, again, are not actual unions. They are policing organizations that act as unions in order for them to reap the benefits won by the working class, but then simultaneously enact violence against that same working class. And so when actual labor unions and actual workers go out and fight in the streets and try to unionize in Starbucks, in Amazon, at UPS, it is the police who are called to crack skulls. It is police who are called to break up those strikes. And so what this group is doing is they hide themselves and they shroud themselves under the label of worker in order to avoid accountability and in order to take advantage of all of these systems that are in place to protect workers. But then when it doesn't benefit them, right, they switch sides and enact that violence on behalf of that ruling class and the elites who are in place in the first place, for whom they ultimately work.
Mm.
And so the problem here
So
in New York
important.
State, and so the problem here in the New York State, no, of course, and the game that they're playing is that because of the lack of funding, right, that has been given to all sectors of our life, prisons included in that, is that you have been left with institutions that no longer have the funding to staff them adequately, to maintain the upkeep of the building, to provide the services necessary for the prisoners and everyone housed inside of those facilities, while at the same time increasing the ways in which more and more people can be sent to these facilities, right? And so you're increasing the numbers of prisoners and people being sent to prison unnecessarily, while at the same time removing all of the resources and whatever, things you had in there for the prisoners and the officers themselves, you're taking that away. And so you're creating these situations. And so these officers, in their frustrations with the working conditions, as they say, but also this newfound threat of accountability, are using this mechanism of the union and work stoppages to try to get around that. And they're targeting their frustrations at the prisoners instead of the folks who are responsible for this in the first place, which are the decision makers and the elites at the top.
It really is incredible and important to understand the way that you framed all that. I wanted to ask you, what further organizing is going on regarding prison conditions in New York, especially in the wake of the death of Mr. Brooks?
So I think there's two specific ones, right? There's the Halt Solitary New York coalition of folks who've been working, who worked to win the HALT Act in the first place. And again, the HALT Act is basically a set of limitations on solitary confinement. And so it comes up with alternatives to solitary confinement. It limits the time that someone can be put into solitary confinement, so it reduces it down to 15 days maximum. It protects certain populations, so pregnant women, the disabled, the elderly who are also being subjected and put indefinitely into solitary confinement. And then it allows for due process for prisoners, right? So prisoners are allowed due process before they're sent into solitary confinement. HALT Solitary NY, the coalition that did that, helped win that and continues to fight to preserve that and to maintain that. The other group that's really important is the Releasing Aging People in Prisons campaign, which is calling on the release of aging prisons. In Pennsylvania, you have a similar campaign, right? To end death by incarceration, which is what it's called. And basically what they're saying is there is a significant population of folks who are already in advanced age, who are elderly, who have no reason being inside of prison to begin with, who could be sent home. You have disabled individuals who have no need being inside of prison and could also be sent home. You could reduce significantly the size of the populations who you have incarcerated in these facilities, right, as a way of alleviating some of these stresses that don't need to exist, and so that you don't have people put in these dangerous situations where ultimately they're going to be abused and killed by corrections officers unnecessarily.
Mm-hmm. Hiram Rivera, founding director of the Community Resource Hub for Safety and Accountability. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you. Thank you.
Rania?
Well, Eugene, I think it's really important to understand police officers and the way he framed them. They're not just your common workers. It doesn't work like that, not in a capitalist system.
Yeah, no, he made the perfect point that when you're on strike and they put an injunction out on you, it's the cops that come and break it up, which is notable. Anyone who spends a lot of time on picket lines, the cops often show up with like coffee and donuts and all these other things like that to be like, hey, we're with you too. The Police Benevolent Association is with you. At least if you're the right type of worker, not if you're like Starbucks workers, but if you have the right type of like macho, manly, blue collar coded kind of thing, then they want to show up and say, hey, we're with you. But it's like, if there's an injunction, those same people who brought you the donuts will come break your head open on behalf of your boss. So the whole thing is a total sham on so many levels. Completely ridiculous. This whole thing, this is completely ridiculous by these prison officers. But we'll have to continue to cover it. In this beating and killing of Robert Brooks, we showed a little bit of the tape there. It's on video. It's absolutely brutal on so many different levels. Well, we're going to... Yes. Very disgusting. Very disgusting. Well, we're going to turn to our last story here, another critically important really set of issues in the Philippines, or emanating from the Philippines. Of course, former President Rodrigo Duterte has been taken to the International Criminal Court, which is what's making headlines. But of course, there's also a big election happening right now in the Philippines, which will determine a lot about the direction of the country moving forward. And I think there's some cross currents here between this. So to help us sort through it all and figure it out, we are very happy to be joined, honored, I must say, by Sarah Raymundo, who's the International Liaison Officer for BAYAN Philippines, and also an assistant professor at the Center for International Studies at the University of the Philippines. Sarah, thank you so much for being with us.
It's great to be here, Eugene. It's great to see you again. And
no,
Rania.
Absolutely. Perfect. Well, I wanted to start here because, maybe I'm being too conspiratorial, but the timing of this ICC, this arrest of President Duterte and the extradition of him to the ICC, it just seems interesting to me because it's in the middle of this big election campaign. And the president, of course, who is touting this is, one side of the big corporate factions and clans in the Philippines. The Duterte family is the other side. So I guess that's the first question I just wanted to ask you is there some overlap here between the political infighting inside of the elites there and the extradition of former President Duterte?
Well, as you know, Eugene, they began as a team. And for the progressive forces, the Marcos Duterte alliance signified the most rotten iteration of Philippine politics. And it's also true, what you said, that there's been a subsequent clash. We fell apart. But the truth is that the Marcos Jr. administration made a conscious effort to shield Duterte from punishment by failing to hold him accountable on a national scale, meaning within the bounds of our national laws. So the ICC arrest is not just a political fight between Marcos and Duterte. We see this as a fight of the victims and the Filipino people for justice and to end impunity, to end human rights violations that continue under the Marcos regime. So we won't let the Marcos regime off the hook because many of Duterte's policies are being continued by this regime, including the National Task Force to end local communist conflict, the anti-terror law. You have red tagging, extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, and other violations. So basically, they are still part of. They're the ruling oligarchy, and Marcos Jr. is very much aware that once a faction of the ruling oligarchy falls, then he could be next.
So in that vein, President Marcos and his allies have been presenting this as a big victory for due process in distinction to Duterte's frequent abuses. But has Marcos been much different than Duterte in terms of human rights?
Well, not really. Of course, we welcome the ICC's action against Duterte, but Duterte, Marcos Jr., together with the U.S. government, were actually found guilty of serious violations of international humanitarian law by the 2024 International People's Tribunal. So in that particular tribunal, Duterte's atrocities were exposed, going beyond the drug war, undertaking counterinsurgency initiatives like the NTF-ELCAC I've mentioned. His policies also targeted peasant communities, human rights advocates, and activists, and also National Democratic Front of the Philippines peace consultants. There were mass murders, forced evacuations, and state-sponsored violence, which were the outcomes of Duterte's explicit orders to kill, kill, kill. And in particular, the war on drugs actually continues to this day. In fact, the University of the Philippines, the HAS project, have recorded 701 killings from 2022 to 2024. So yes, the Philippines as a semi-colony of few of the United States has been denounced by the IPT because the United States is actually an entity that's been giving the armed forces of the Philippines and the Philippine National Police military support, training, intelligence, and U.S. imperialism has really historically supported Philippine fascist government. So Duterte's reign of terror was directly influenced by U.S.-funded counterinsurgency. And under Marcos' U.S.-sponsored military actions, these atrocities still continue. These attacks are still continue, and of course, they are mainly targeting the legal democratic movement, as well as the armed revolutionary movement.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the issue of the legal democratic movement, because the other thing that is happening right now is we have elections coming up in the Philippines, and the Makabayan bloc of a number of working class pro-people organizations is out there campaigning very hard for a different vision of what the Philippines could look like as opposed to the major parties. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, because certainly in the West, all you ever hear is either Marcos or Duterte. Most people don't even know that there is something else in the field happening.
Right, absolutely. Well, Makabayan began as a coalition of progressive party list groups with Bayan Muna being one of the most popular and also severely red tag, demonized by the state. Currently, Makabayan has representatives of the women's sector, Gabriela of the youth, that's Kabataan Party List, and the teachers movement, that's the ACT Teachers Party List in Congress. So they're in Congress. And Makabayan has been building up a senatorial slate of 11 people who are also mass leaders from the peasant movement, from the workers' movement. There's a representative from the fisher folk, as well as health workers, urban poor, and also longtime lawmakers like Bayan Chair Teddy Casino and former International League of People Struggle Secretary General Liza Masa. So the main idea of this senatorial slate, alongside the party list groups, is that there's a demand for a new kind of politics that is not propelled by by political dynasties, which breeds corruption and violence. And so this current effort from the National Democratic Movement is a response to the people's desire and demand for an alternative, for something better than U.S. imperialist puppets, bureaucrat capitalists, and fascist mass murderers. And basically, what's better is a program for a genuine agrarian reform and a people-centered national economy, national industrialization, because these are necessary conditions for the Filipino people to assert our national sovereignty and the right to self-determination. And currently, as you mentioned, the Makabayan slate has been visiting regions, different regions in the country, in order to learn more from the people, so that we can enrich this general program for progressive politics, a program for genuine reform in government.
I want to ask you about the U.S. because, we're obviously a U.S.-based show, so we can't, talk about any part of the world without bringing up U.S. empire. And the U.S. has been significantly increasing its military presence in the Philippines. So I'm curious, how are progressive organizations in the Philippines seeing and responding to these developments?
Yes, it's true what you said. That's exactly what's happening. And you've probably heard of the crash of a U.S. plane in Maguindanao del Sur. This is a U.S. aircraft contracted by the Department of Defense, our Department of Defense, and supposedly it was conducting intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. And they call this missions. And this episode really calls into question the U.S. military's ongoing and expanding presence on the Philippine territory under the pretext of security cooperation. And there's also been a buildup of U.S. military bases in different regions in the Philippines. And this is primarily the U.S. propping the Indo-Pacific war theater, mainly to encircle China. So what this shows is that 90 years of U.S. military oversight of the Philippine military, with the perpetual promise of increased capability, modernization of the military, only results in crash landings, while the entire Philippines, the entire nation, is being dragged into U.S. imperialist endless wars. So how are we responding to this? So it's true, mainly through educational discussion and political campaigns on the necessity of an independent foreign policy for the Philippines. We've been studying the history of U.S. militarism in the Philippines and other countries, mobilizing for mass actions in the U.S. Embassy. And there have also been peace missions where our friends from the United States and other parts of the world, but mostly from North America, come over and conduct social investigation on the U.S. military buildup. So we hosted one last year, in May last year, and we are hosting another one this coming mid-year. And you are so invited to join. So the reason for this, reinforced anti-fascist, anti-imperialist campaign on the part of the movement here in the Philippines is that what we really need, it is what we really need, right? A broad, united front against fascism and imperialism. And this is what we've been undertaking.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And I've been in all the important spaces to build that internationally, and we appreciate it. And we appreciate you joining us, Sarah Raymundo, International Liaison Officer of BAYAN Philippines. Great to have you, and thanks for giving us some of your time.
Thank you so much, Eugene and Rania.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Eugene.
Yeah, well, I just didn't think I needed to prompt you since I usually just say, well, Rania, I thought I'd just let you roll with it.
I wanted to beat you. No, I thought I was beating you to it, but you just took that away from me.
Yeah, no, well, listen, okay, we can reverse the course. It definitely is critically important. I think it'll be very interesting to see what happens in the elections. But I would say that the democratic movement in the Philippines is doing a lot, around the world to try to rally forces against fascism, for peace, against imperialism and war. So one of the more interesting subcurrents is it's not really just about the Philippines, but many of the Filipino people reaching out to like-minded people around the globe to try to do more around these critical challenges I think we're all facing. And yeah, you look at what's happening right now. I mean, the U.S. pretty much openly saying that the Philippines is the forward base to fight China. And anyone who knows anything about U.S. military strategy, it's like if there was to be a major war between them, the Philippines would be hit right away, perhaps with nuclear weapons. Given the way the U.S. is positioned there and the type of forces they position. And I actually is in a different context talking to Sarah about this. There's a movie on Netflix that came out, I guess, towards the end of last year. I don't know why the name is eluding me now, but it's like a special forces action type movie, but it's set in the Philippines. And the opening of the thing is there's a Filipino, basically that just was terrorists all over the Philippines, and that the world, this is the most dangerous zone of the world you've never heard of in the Philippines and Indonesia, and we have to be prepared to fight. And then the whole movie is just these special forces people fighting against this sort of, it's kind of like an Abu Sayyaf, if people know Philippines, kind of shadowy Islamic terrorist militant thing. But I just thought to myself, even putting the movie aside, just the opening title cards that are you don't know about it, but the Philippines is really the most dangerous part of the globe that you've never heard of, so we better have the military there. I was just you talk about manufacturing consent. I mean, Jesus, you couldn't slap somebody in the face harder with, a more ridiculous statement. I mean, it's really unbelievable. And the movie itself is, absurd. And I mean, the sort of way it displays the Filipino
incredible.
people, ridiculous. But notable and important. So I'm glad we were able to talk about it.
Same. Eugene, we have a surprise next week. We're not going to say what, but I'm very excited for it.
Yes, that's true. We do have a surprise next week, so maybe we should get ready to end the show now so we can leave you on great suspense. But before we get off, Rania, are there things you would like our viewers to know on the way out?
Always. I want to remind everybody to, first of all, like, subscribe, and share. Make sure you smash that like button, you guys. Helps boost us in the algorithm. And also, please consider supporting Breakthrough News. You can access exclusive content and merch by becoming a member for as little as $5 a month at patreon.com/Breakthrough News. And you will be a part of the movement to support independent media that brings you what's happening on the ground in the movement. So support Breakthrough News so we can keep going and growing.
Yeah. I like that you're sticking with that. But yes, please help support us. Keep doing your thing however you can to help us spread the word, raise some money, and keep doing what we are doing at a bigger and better level. I don't know if that's the right phrasing there, but let's just go ahead and use that. Nonetheless, big shout out to all our guests. Big thanks to, of course, everyone who viewed the show. And, of course, big shout out to the whole Breakthrough News team behind the scenes that makes the show possible. For myself, for Rania, for the whole BT News team, we will see you next time.
Revolution knows no compromise. Revolution overturns and destroys everything that gets gets in its way.